A battle that claimed 2 million lives and was decided by the weather. Stalingrad, the clash that changed the course of World War II. The year 1942 marked a pivotal shift in the dynamics of World War II in favor of the Allied forces. Two key moments define this transformation. One was the British success in reversing the tide against Nazi Germany in North Africa. Under the leadership of Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, British forces defeated German troops led by General Erwin Rommel in the Battle of El Alamein, Egypt. This decisive battle took place between October and November of 1942. In June 1942, the United States achieved victory in the Battle of Midway against Japan. However, neither El Alamein nor Midway carried the same historical weight as the Battle of Stalingrad between the Soviet Red Army and Germany's Wehrmacht. Stalingrad was one of the largest and most intense battles of World War II. The Soviet victory there marked the true turning point in the course of the war. After failing in Moscow, Hitler targets Stalingrad. By the midpoint of World War II in the spring of 1942, Nazi Germany had occupied most of the territories of present-day Ukraine and Belarus. Its strategic objective was to capture the capital of the Soviet Union, Moscow. To achieve this, the German Wehrmacht decided to launch an offensive in southern Russia during the summer of that year, according to history. Prior to that, Soviet forces, under the leadership of General Joseph Stalin, successfully repelled a German offensive on the western part of the country during the winter of 1941 to 1942. The ultimate goal of the offensive was to capture Moscow. This operation inflicted significant losses on the Soviet Union, both in terms of manpower and weaponry, fueling German hopes that the Soviet resistance was nearing its breaking point. Stalin and his generals, including future Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev, anticipated another Nazi offensive on Moscow, believing that the Germans would remain focused on the Soviet capital. However, Hitler and the Wehrmacht had a different plan in mind. Hitler set his sights on the city of Stalingrad, as it was a key industrial hub for the Soviet Union, supplying the Red Army with artillery ammunition. Additionally, the Volga River, which runs through the city, served as a vital waterway connecting the western part of the country to its distant eastern regions. This was not the first time a fierce battle had erupted over control of the city. During the Bolshevik Revolution, Russian forces fought a 2-year struggle to secure the city. It was later renamed Stalingrad in honor of Soviet leader Joseph Stalin after the revolution's conclusion. Ultimately, Adolf Hitler wanted the Wehrmacht to capture Stalingrad for its symbolic value, as the city bore the name of Joseph Stalin, as previously mentioned. For similar reasons, the Soviet Russians felt a heightened sense of urgency to defend it. Everything indicated that the Battle of Stalingrad would become the deadliest confrontation in the history of World War II. When Hitler declared that, upon capturing Stalingrad, all male residents of the city would be killed and its women deported, Stalin ordered all Soviet Russians capable of wielding a rifle to take up arms and defend the city that bore his name. Hitler chooses summer for his offensive on Stalingrad. The harsh winter had hindered the German leaders' plans to subdue the Eastern Front. With the arrival of the milder summer weather in Soviet territory, Hitler decided to resume his offensive against the Soviet Union. The city of Stalingrad, located on the Volga River, was an industrial hub that not only produced military supplies, but also served as a key strategic point in the invasion of Russia. Capturing it would secure the German army's left flank as it advanced toward the oil-rich Caucasus region. The primary German objective in attacking Stalingrad was to cut off fuel supplies to the Soviet Red Army. The city of Stalingrad, located on the Volga River, was an industrial hub that not only produced military supplies, but also served as a key strategic point in the invasion of Russia. Capturing it would secure the German army's left flank as it advanced toward the oil-rich Caucasus region. The primary German objective in attacking Stalingrad was to cut off fuel supplies to the Soviet Red Army. The extensive destruction and relentless, indiscriminate bombardment of Stalingrad by German forces marked the first mistake the Germans made during the battle. According to the French historian François Kersaudy, author of the book Stalingrad, The Turning Point of the War, he stated, "Defending a destroyed city is much easier than defending one where all the buildings remain intact." The Germans found it increasingly difficult to drive the Soviets out of their positions in this landscape of ruins. Amid the massive destruction caused by the intense German bombardment, Joseph Stalin called upon everyone capable of bearing arms to head to Stalingrad and defend it. Soviet women dug trenches along the front lines, while workers took up arms and joined the fight. Stalin demanded that his forces hold their ground at all costs. On July 28th, he issued the famous Order Number 277, which prohibited troops from retreating from the city. Violators faced court-martial and possibly execution. In the initial phase of the battle, German ground forces managed to advance deep into Stalingrad. The Wehrmacht gained control of 90% of the city, leaving the Soviets with only the industrial area in the northern part of Stalingrad, according to a report by France 24. In the remaining 10% of Stalingrad, the Germans were forced to engage in an unfamiliar military tactic: urban warfare. The German forces had little prior experience fighting in cities, making this a significant challenge for them. In this context, French historian François Kersaudy, in his aforementioned book, notes that the Germans were accustomed to large-scale maneuvers in open terrain. During the battle, they faced two major challenges. The Soviet Red Army could attack German forces through tunnels and sewers, and the Soviets continued to bombard German positions with artillery from the far side of the Volga River, which the Wehrmacht was unable to cross. With fewer than 20,000 soldiers in the city and under 100 tanks, Stalin's generals finally began sending reinforcements to Stalingrad and its surrounding areas. Fierce fighting erupted in the streets of the city, with both sides deploying snipers on the rooftops of its buildings. In the autumn, Generals Georgy Zhukov and Alexander Vasilevsky joined the command of the Soviet forces in the north and west of Stalingrad. From there, they launched a counter-offensive known as Operation Uranus, according to the Encyclopedia Britannica. Despite suffering significant losses once again, Soviet forces managed to establish a defensive ring around the city by late November 1942, trapping nearly 300,000 German soldiers within. The harsh winter decides the Battle of Stalingrad in favor of the Soviets. When the harsh Soviet winter set in, German forces faced yet another challenge. The Soviets were cutting off and attacking supply lines, striking from their homes and even through the sewer systems. Despite this, Hitler refused to surrender or halt the offensive on Stalingrad, even as his men were starving. By February 1943, Soviet forces had captured 100,000 German soldiers and taken full control of Stalingrad, although pockets of German resistance continued fighting in the city until early March. Most of the German prisoners perished in Russian prison camps, succumbing to disease or starvation. Stalingrad stood as one of the most decisive battles that shifted the course of the war in favor of the Allies. The Soviet recapture of Stalingrad marked Adolf Hitler's first public acknowledgement of failure. During the battle, over 1.1 million Soviet troops and approximately 40,000 civilians were killed. Casualties among Axis forces, led by the Germans, are estimated at around 800,000. The battle has been ranked by Army Technology as one of the 10 bloodiest battles of the 20th century.
Dass ich fleißig gewesen bin, dass ich gearbeitet habe, dass ich mich in diesem Jahr eingesetzt habe, dass ich anständig meine Zeit